It is Thursday, October 10th, and it's 6:02 p.m. Call the meeting to order. First item on the agenda is to vote on the minutes from our last meeting on September 12th.
Make a motion to approve the 9/12 minutes of the
Second.
EDC.
Second.
Rick seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Next, just some quick chair updates. So we'll go through some chair updates on some of the standing items that we have. Then I think the bulk tonight, we're going to get into the strategic plan from the Board of Selectmen that we handed out last time. The intention there is to really collect feedback, and what I'll do is I'll consolidate and hand that up to off to Mika and the board, right, on their specific areas. And then the POCD. So I know Steve and Scott were at the walkthrough last night. I think you were busy.
Forgot.
Chatty, I didn't know if you made it there. Sherry, you didn't make it. Okay, great. I did route to everybody a copy of the research. I don't know if you all got the research results, so we can kind of chat about that. And we do have a deliverable on that, but that's going to be for November, so we'll talk through that. Then I have a quick update on 2030. We'll talk a little bit about business retention. Sherry's going to give us an update on the retail pop-ups, and so we have quite a bit on the agenda. So first item for chair updates, the Woodbridge Economic Development Plan, which is Goldman and York and our town planning consultant. I finally had a chance to meet with Justin LaFountain this morning to kind of go through where they are. So they now have a scope of work and an agreement with the town. And we started some high-level conversations around the development of a formal economic development plan, right? And one that can hopefully help us kind of tie all the different pieces that we're working on together into one sort of overarching economic development plan. So they're, Chatty.
That statement of work you mentioned, do we have access to that?
I actually haven't seen their formal scope of work yet, so this was more of me talking to him like, hey, here's where I envision you could help us at this point. In the request for proposal from way back in the spring, it was very much pointed at economic development, but there are a lot of other groups that are involved. So he's been doing a lot of work with planning and zoning. For example, there's a Fountain Street. I don't know if you're all familiar with Fountain, which is right on the edge of the country club there. They're looking at potential multifamily development, which is really exciting. So Mika has him involved working with them, for example. So, but I did have a good conversation with him this morning, and what we agreed was he would come and kind of next meeting have a workshop to sort of kick off their process with us. So I was very encouraged by that. And we'll go from there. But they're getting involved with the POCD, which we're going to talk about tonight. So they have their hand in a lot of things, as town planners should. Secondly, the former CCW master plan. So at the Board of Selectmen meeting last night, there was a proposal that's under consideration. They did not come to an agreement on it. Regarding the advisory committee that we've been discussing. How is it constituted? Who's on it? How do we select the members? And so the proposal that was put forward was to include key stakeholder groups, which are the boards and commissions that we had identified previously. So housing, conservation, CUPOP, right? That advisory committee would be led by EDC. And obviously Cooper Robertson, the consultant. So this is the proposal that went in front of them with the stakeholder boards and commissions selecting their representation. Okay. So they are, and basically what would happen would be the Board of Selectmen would review that work as part of a standing agenda item on their meeting. So the EDC rep and Cooper Robertson would go back to them every single month. So this is what's on the table. It wasn't decided, and they are going to have a special meeting to review this in more detail on October 23rd. So we're getting close to getting resolution on the advisory committee piece, which is taking a little bit of time, but I think is critically important. You know, as
Okay.
we want to have broad representation and objectivity, right? So,
And I think also the key thing that Mika also said when I was watching was the main one was expertise. In other words, to make sure that within that broad representation and different opinions, but in those different opinions, having real experts as those different opinions. So, so that was the big. I wish he had said it about 100 times, but you know, I think he was saying experienced representation from a broad base as the factors of how you nominate somebody.
right. So,
So the Board of Selectmen will be rejiggering those various committees and representation on those committees?
stay tuned. So I would say that that's a big part of what they're going to discuss on the 23rd. So I don't want to speak out of school,
I see.
right? But that's where I think a lot of the conversation went last night. And of course, you all can tune into WGA TV and watch it for yourselves.
Okay.
That was towards the end of the meeting. So, and then the last update I had was just on business community outreach. So since the last time we met, Mika and Cliff did have a meeting with ServPro. And Cliff was nice enough to send me his notes before he headed off to Florida.
Cliff notes?
Cliff notes.
Okay.
Very good.
You couldn't restrain yourself.
I'm showing my age, I'm sure, right?
So,
How
you know,
old was I?
it was.
It's an
That's,
old joke.
that's fast. Wow. All right.
No, I think he's been thinking about it for about a month.
I was waiting.
You've been waiting to use that, haven't you?
All right. So they did get a chance to meet with the owner. You know, one of the things is ServPro is staying where they are in Woodbridge, right? So I was under the impression that they were relocating to Shelton, but they're just expanding. So they were not able to expand their business the way they wanted to in Woodbridge was sort of the feedback that he had. He was very receptive. I guess they had presented kind of the conceptual on 2030 and the business district development work. He was very receptive to that. He also brought up tax abatements, which is the first time we've heard this from any of our outreach. And he gave Cliff an example. I want to dig into a little bit more when he's back, but he talked about Oxford and a tenant manufacturer getting a 5-year abatement at 80%, which is very rich. So, you know, for history, we've put abatement plans together in the past and really didn't make a lot of progress. This was about a year or two ago, but they communicated that that's something that's on the table. And when we talk about the Board of Selectmen strategy, actually, we'll see that tax
Was
abatement.
this his that he had actually received or somebody that he knew?
He
'Cause
said.
I was thinking Dale Krupp might have been saying that
Specifically
that was
mentioned a
80% on the-
property
on the
he developed in
incremental
Oxford and a
improvement.
tenant manufacturer getting 5-year abatement at 80% through. This is where I want to learn more.
Yeah, maybe it was a big rehab or something, yeah.
It might have been. It might have
Big
been.
incremental
but,
change in the evaluation.
you know, I mean, an 80% tax abatement over a 5-year period is very
Sure.
healthy.
Sure, but there's something on both sides of the equation.
Correct. Right. Absolutely. So that's really the three updates that I had, and then wanted to get into the Board of Selectmen strategic plan. And really, the intention here is to just get, you know, everybody's feedback, what questions you might have, having read through it, and you know, basically what we go back to the Board of Selectmen with. And so we can kick it off and maybe just talk about the individual goal buckets. I think is the way to do it, right? So the first goal, which has a lot of EDC, of course, in ensuring financial stability. So I'll stop talking and let someone else jump in.
I guess the one thing that I picked up on was Tactic C under Goal 1.
Mm-hmm.
We're asking for the business development plan from the EDC.
Correct.
And, yeah, so I think that's probably something that we need to be able to finalize or put together. And do we have a plan for doing that plan?
That's really what I see is where Goldman and York comes in and the town planner, right?
Okay.
And then obviously us working with them on that, but creating that plan that sort of fuses everything together, right? I mean, now we have like the master plan for the country club, we've got 2030, we've got a few different initiatives, but how do they all hang together against here's where we're really trying to go over the next 2, 5, 7 years, right?
And do you have a sense, Scott, as to how long it might take us to put that together, or is there sort of a sub-goal?
I when I look back at their original proposal, I want to say it was like maybe a 6-month process
Oh, okay.
to go through it.
Okay.
That's what I recall. I'd say one thing that jumped out at me that I thought was interesting was just how we described strategy 1, right? Which is diversify and grow the grand list by focusing on attracting and retaining Woodbridge businesses. Right? So what are your thoughts on that statement?
Well, I was gonna say too, that even goes with what I was thinking, tactic E,
Mm-hmm.
like, what's an incentive program for consideration? And do we have any other towns or resources that we can maybe tap into to ask what they've done that's made them successful?
Mm-hmm.
Cause I don't even really know where to start, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah, I mean that's the tax abatement is an example of
Right,
that.
right, but besides tax abatement, right, like what else would incent people to wanna be in business?
Right. Right. What are other?
Yeah, besides financial.
Mhm.
Access to other supporting services,
Right.
access to talented workforce,
Workforce?
Right.
easy transportation access.
Okay.
Maybe they want to come into a town that's quieter and slower instead of downtown New
Yep.
Haven, but still have access to downtown New Haven.
Right.
Yep.
So you're kind of getting into what makes Woodbridge unique
Yes.
Right.
Selling
Right.
Woodbridge.
versus necessarily like a financial incentive, but it's sort of what's inherently here.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Financial incentive, we got to commit something to. But if we don't have the other stuff in the same elevator pitch,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
financial incentive may get you in the door, but doesn't keep you at the party. Right.
Right.
Well, and do we even have an elevator pitch?
Well, that's a good point. Do we
Right,
think we have an elevator pitch?
I would say no,
I'd say
but
no.
I'm not the
Yeah.
leading
And is it
expert
our
there.
job?
If somebody said, "Why should I relocate my business to Woodbridge?" What would
'Cause
you
we're nice
I
people.
think that's what we
We need
should
to
be
come
doing.
up with, right?
That
Yeah.
would be my guess. The
Okay.
Economic Development Committee would kind of identify, like, we had, I forgot who they were, 2 ladies that came in and presented a bunch of information to us.
from Rex?
Ginny Kozlowski?
I'm-
Yes, yes.
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 So we would present, or we put the story together that says, we have this type of town population, medical focused, engineering focused, whatever it is. So we're putting together that based on the statistics we put together or we get from Gorman or whoever it is that we get from the ladies that we talked about a minute ago. So I would say we put together
Mm-hmm.
that elevator pitch based on what we would essentially define in our own
All
Right.
right.
strategic plan.
Well, and then after
That's
the.
a great point, right? So I'm sorry. Go
No,
ahead.
no,
Sharon.
no, I was gonna say, but after the elevator pitch, right, what's our target? Is it the businesses in town? Are there businesses out of town that we wanna
Right.
bring in town?
I'd say both.
Both, right?
Yeah.
And that was part of my conversation with Justin this morning. Like, where do we want to focus, right? And we talked months ago about sectors, right? And I think that is part of the tactic C, to Steve's point, right, with the growth goals. So we can maybe reorganize some of this between A, B, and C and see what the board thinks. But you're making great points there, Chad.
Can I ask a question? At our last meeting, Mika brought this up. Did he ask us to review this, or did he asked us to review this? Did he also ask us to put our own strategic plan together? Did he make that comment?
The request was for feedback on this and changes, because this is not done, right? So, and our names are all over this
Right,
part
that's part of
of the plan.
Charlie, to your question, I think the other thing that was discussed was the POCD, where they were looking for us to put priorities together.
Correct.
So there was two subjects that we discussed, so it sounds sort of like those priorities needed to be put together soon as well.
Right, so the POCD, what I took away from Chris's note was like goals for the next 10 years, which I don't even know if I have those for my own life. So, like, it's a big ask, right?
I know
So,
my son doesn't. I shouldn't say that, he could be watching.
right. So this was really about, the Board of Selectmen plan, and they actually talked about this last night, which I thought was interesting. They talked about the time horizon on this. Did you? I don't know if you caught it, but this is geared towards through the end of 2025, right? And it's kind of syncs up with their terms. But the way it was put was this is intended to be modified and updated, as you go forward. So could be longer term than just the next year or two, but these are some of the the key areas of focus. But when I looked at strategy 1, that was where I with a lot of our conversations in our first year together, right? Diversifying and growing the grand list by focusing on attracting and retaining Woodbridge businesses, right? And you saw this in the feedback in the POCD, right? Like, we want a diversified grand list, take some of the pressure off of the residents, right?
So you want me to take the hook?
Well, you go.
You want me to take that hook?
This was for you.
This is my hook?
I set this up for you.
Yeah, I know you did. You gave me a softball. Diversify what? I mean, I've been running and keeping track of the toll numbers right now. So up until recently, right, until we got, the application in our zoning to look at our zoning to make sure it complies with the law, up until recently, we didn't allow multifamily housing in any residential zone. And we didn't have any residential zones in our business zones, right? But we did allow some multifamily housing in what's called Dev 1 and Dev 2. And Dev 1 and Dev 2 are down in the flats where they're building Toll Brothers. But that was limited to 55 plus house, 55 active. If it was going to be multifamily, it had to be 55 active. But, so I've been keeping track of the Toll Brothers numbers down there. And that's like if you want to talk about the biggest tooting of the horn, the biggest economic boom to our town is happening there right now from an economic point of view. So let's just do the quick math on that. It's going to be 70 units. It looks like they're selling. It looks like you're averaging 700 and some thousand per unit. So let's do the quick math back of the envelope. That's what we're all good at, right? So we're putting 50 million in the ground right now. Taxes on that when it gets going is going to be about $1 million, round number, $1 million a year. So let's put that in perspective. Building a Beecher Road school, a new one's about $6 million a year in debt service, right? You probably need, back of the envelope. I'm not going to miss it by a lot. $6 million a year. So now you've just gotten 16% of your new school from Toll Brothers development.
Right.
Or
You just got 16. So now if you want to get the whole school, if that's our economic development, if that's what we want to grow that and diversify that grand list. So now we've got to get in six more. So you got to get 300 more million in the ground. Now you may have increased costs to go along that, so you need 400 million or 500 million or whatever the number is. That's why we got Justin. That's why we got experts that can help us and say, what do you need what you get in the ground. But I think that's a useful thing to really, we've got to understand that it may not be what you want. I don't know if it's what you want to see, but it is a huge economic driver right now. And then, of course, if you take the national home builders, because they like to build houses, they would say that there's all sorts of other benefits about job creation. And I know it's not in our town, but it is job creation. It's selling a sandwich, it's selling a Gatorade, it's all those kinds of things that go along. And there's the core, and then there's the residual on that economic development piece. But if you had 10 projects over the next 20 years, then you're going to have that every year for 20 years. So I'm just saying, is that something that I think when we say diversify for attracting and retaining businesses, then who's doing the real money in the town? If we're not doing the big stuff, who's doing the big stuff in the town?
Right.
That's my comment. Thanks for the softball.
Okay.
I hope I hit it at least out of the infield.
I have a follow-up on that. So I don't know if anybody knows, but do you have an idea, does anybody have an idea how Toll Brothers is doing? I mean, if we build all this,
So I
and are they
tried-
gonna come or not? I mean,
So I'm tracking it right now.
Yeah.
There's 35 on the south and it's 35 now going on the north. They've
Right.
cleared off the north side.
I saw that.
And
Yeah,
so-
I
and so-
assume when they decided to clear that
So-
off, that was a good sign.
I only
Yeah.
track them when they've recorded. So I go on the
Okay.
land records. They've actually sold more and they've actually done more. And I was down in the building the other day. So we've got, or yesterday. So we've got 250,000 in permanent income so far. We'll have that'll go another 250,000 when they do the other side. This is starting in February.
Yeah.
So we're in a eight month window. So this is not even for annualized. So we're at 250,000 in permanent income, probably about 50,000 in conveyance tax. And then each unit's, garnering about 12 grand in real estate taxes.
Okay.
So you're gonna have 70 of them, times 12,000 or 12.5 or something, so that's the million I'm saying.
But I guess the question I'm asking is, do we have a sense of how well it's doing?
They've got 21 closed right now, and I think they're on to,
That's-
so
yeah.
I
That's
was,
the question I think people
But
watching wanna know.
they've built
Right.
35.
yeah, and I was concerned too, because I said this is a little bit more in the weeds, but I think it's an illustrative thing that we need for our onboarding in our successive years, so we teach this, and then we have another lesson that we teach. We track all sorts of stuff. Other towns do that with their planners. But I was concerned that in their declaration for condominium, they had taken out the north side, but it looks like they're obviously feeling they're gonna do it over there now and put it back in. And I will say this, one thing that I really talked to somebody about is they said, well, I take the train to New York, and have you seen all the housing at the stations, the train stations? It's like everything is 5 stories.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you go all around, you go to New Haven, where's all the people that are gonna, but I was told you have to realize that there hasn't been any development of housing for like the last 15 years. And so the crisis got to a breaking point. So whenever we see this, like this great sweeping, what we think is sweeping development of 70 units, it doesn't even put a dent in the,
Okay.
it doesn't put a dent. I track where they come from. And so I'm tracking their addresses and not their names, they're disclosing information, their names, but and so I'm tracking where they're coming from, out of state or in state, Woodbridge to Woodbridge to Woodbridge, Orange to Woodbridge, and so I'm tracking those towns. That's the kind of data I think that informs the real stuff about, so we can clear up, and if we have misconceptions, and I haven't, I'm not advocating for something, but I just think that that's a really big one not to miss, of how powerful that was. As I say, 6 more, what was the number, but 6 more of those, and you got a new school, brand new.
Right.
Right, and if you
But we
go-
may have other
if you
legal
go back
obligations for
to-
housing, but that's another story for another
If you
day.
go back to February, March, right, when we were breaking the grand list apart, right, and one mill is one Toll Brothers, right? It's $1
Yeah.
million, right?
Right,
That's
right.
one mill
Okay.
on the mill rate,
Okay.
right? So, I guess the reason I bring it up is when you read the statement, right, by attracting and retaining Woodbridge businesses. Should we push back and try to expand the thinking a little beyond simply attracting and retaining businesses? Should we fold residential
Actual into it.
development?
Yes.
And
Yes.
I think it's
And have that under our purview as well?
well, I think this is about how you do it, right?
Okay.
And if you
What do you mean by
fold,
that?
I'm sorry.
What do you mean by that? And how you do it?
Well, it's how do you diversify and grow the grand list, right? So if you're diversifying the grand list and the intention is to take the tax burden off of the residents, and the answer is how do you do that? Well, more residents, right? I think it's a healthy conversation, right? But when you look at the strategy and are we going to take the tax burden off of the residents through attracting and retaining businesses based on what we've learned, right? Is there enough there in the development of our commercial tax base to really impact things? right?
Probably not, right?
I'm not, it sounds like I might be leading, but that, I know
I'll
what,
take another at-bat.
okay,
I mean, I think that's a Justin call, but I'm not in economic development. My background was in investments. And so I know what leads somebody to want to invest in the community. But, having made investments in an endowment. But I think it's a Justin question, but from what I've just tried to educate myself after I retired was, I thought, and I would love to hear experts say, but there's a sequence to that. And so that once you do have the mass of transportation and people, because you can't put people if you can't move them. And if you can't move them, if they don't have highways, they don't have driving and whatever, you gotta move them, so you need moving people. And then the businesses will be there because they're gonna need to wash their clothes. They're gonna need to get a haircut.
Right.
And they're gonna need to buy food. And
Right.
so I'm saying is the way you do, so maybe the person that wrote this, the commission, is talking about, we gotta build housing so we can then diversify and attract businesses. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I suppose there's another way to think about it, and we could try to get factories to come into town. But then I think we gotta have housing for the workforce.
Yeah.
One can come before the other, right? You can have people, then you can get the jobs, or you can
right,
get the business and get the people.
right.
But would the business come? That was my point of asking Justin. Would the business come to an area where there's no labor?
Depends on what we have to offer.
Well,
Right.
and I think that's another, something I would love to have input from those seeking to relocate their businesses, right? How important is that, right? Are they not choosing Woodbridge because there's no housing available for the workforce? Or are they looking at it and saying, hey, the workforce is all commutable, right? We don't necessarily need to have everybody living in the town that they work in, right? But we can speculate on that, but that's where I think you need to have the conversations with those that are looking at, hey, where do I relocate my business, right? And how are they choosing? But I don't know. I just thought when I read this, and not to belabor it, but we may use this as an opportunity to kind of push on. We know where we want to go, right? In terms of growing the grand list, but is commercial alone going to get us where we want to be? And it's the choice, and strategy is a choice, right? Is the choice that we need to add residents to truly lessen the tax burden on residents? Is that where this is?
Well, I think the answer is half yes, because we can do that, but we also are having the same conversations about housing, affordable housing, multifamily housing. That's achieving what you're talking about, so they kind of go hand in hand. So I'm with you. We add another tactic in here that talks about increasing the residential.
I think it may even be a modification of strategy one, right? To expand that.
I might say that, Steve, I was probably interrupting you, so
No, you
please
go
go.
right ahead. I do have something to say, but you please go right ahead.
I don't want you to lose your, I tend to lose my thought if I'm, when I'm in.
Thanks, go right ahead.
Steve's filed it away.
He's
ready.
Now I don't know what I want to say.
It's in the RAM, right? That's where it's located, so you can quickly access it.
and maybe, Shadi, you were saying too, is my full comment to the housing economic development issue is also, though, I think this is a strategic plan for the town, and I know we're an EDC, but I also think as a strategic plus, I think there needs to be an emphasis on housing, and I think there certainly has to be an emphasis that we're part of a larger community, that we're not isolated up in the town, we're part of a regional approach. That's gonna make us stronger, our region stronger, what we have to offer as our mission, in our town, what we have to offer as part of a region, I think, stronger. So I think that's lacking in that. And also an importance that I think a strategic plan has to say that we need to comply with the laws that are out there, that, you can't turn anywhere without hearing housing.
Right.
And so I think we have to at least acknowledge as part of our long-range plan is to comply with the housing laws as they're coming up. And maybe we have to understand them first to say we're gonna comply with them, but to say that we're gonna comply with them, whatever they are, I think, I think that's important. So from my perspective is that it's not only economic, but it's as a strategic plan to emphasize it and as something that we wanna comply with. I just think it's important for our town. In the regional context, we're gonna do better in attracting investment. And that's my goal, is would be
Right.
attract investment in our town to put it in the ground so we can,
I was just going to be sure that we didn't lose in our consideration the necessity for balance and diversification. And if we just go after residential, it can be a very slippery slope. You know, granted, 70 units, 55 and over, is a much different contribution to our housing mix than concentrated affordable housing in order to meet mandated standards. And so therefore, I just think that, as this started by saying that it's important that we approach this with balance and consideration toward diversification between commercial development and residential development, with the understanding that they are very different, and that residential development, we're finding with Toll Brothers, boom, they start putting them up and they're selling real fast, whereas the timeline to develop commercial space and to cultivate diverse commercial enterprises, it is a much longer timeline. So
And much more difficult because there's other infrastructure that has to be in place to
very true.
bring
All
that,
of that.
bring that on.
And
Yeah.
I still think we need to be better educated on the tax contribution of commercial, right? Like the work that we've done, it's not a ton to wring out of it.
Right.
Because you're really talking about existing real estate, right?
Yeah.
And you're talking about property tax,
Mm-hmm.
which even if you bring in, and this is where I get over my skis, right? But my understanding is if you bring in manufacturing, for example, there's a huge exemption against all of that equipment, right? So it
Right.
provides,
Yeah.
And that's what, I don't want to speak out of school, but at some point,
Yeah.
I think we should have Marcia Benno, we keep talking about this, come in and educate us on, what is the valuation
Okay.
of, a vacant retail front versus one that has a business in it.
Yep.
Okay, what, how are industrials taxed, right? And so we can maybe, and that should help, I think, inform some of the strategy on how do we want to grow, right? Like, if that's the intention, is to grow the grand list, right, and the tax base, then where are the real opportunities to do that? I don't know.
Okay.
Anything else on this one?
Is there a deliverable that we have to give as a recommendation out of this meeting on each one of these
I'm
things?
gonna
or-
consolidate
Okay.
this, and then I'll route it, like some
Okay.
some.
No, it's not
feedback
like we
that
have to make motions and, okay.
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I mean, I'll route it to everyone.
Okay.
Tony's looking at me. Do we need to make motions on the feedback that we provide?
I don't know that it's necessary. I'm not 100% certain, honestly.
Okay.
Let me talk to the town clerk about
Okay,
it.
Okay.
thank you.
An option is I'll consolidate this, and then
Yeah.
we can next meeting.
Next meeting,
Right, I think,
if it needs to be more formal. Yep.
I think what we've done for Coop is this, so we don't have to, I don't think approve every single thing, but what might make sense is if then there's a consensus. I mean, you're getting pretty much a feel of everybody's doing now. If you
Mhm.
draft it up, everybody looks at it, tweak it if it needs to be tweaked.
Okay,
But, maybe people should vote on what's going to,
Okay.
as a recommendation.
Right.
I think, because we do that in Coop for some of their recommendations on properties and how to change, usage. So
Okay.
maybe similar could follow suit, but I will definitely follow up the town clerk and confirm if anything else
Okay.
needs to be done.
thank you.
Okay. The one other thing before we jump off of this was I saw a reference to New Main Street. including the new Main Street concept for consideration in upcoming POCD.
Oh, there
So,
it is.
I hadn't heard of New Main Street. That was the first I read it. Were you familiar with it?
No.
Okay.
No.
I don't know what
You
that
hadn't
is.
heard anything? Okay.
Nope.
Maybe
So-
referring to 2030?
I didn't know if that was code, but 2030 is included in Tactic A.
Right.
So,
Right.
I'll follow up and get some.
And I do
clarification
believe,
on
at
that.
least I read the charge of 2030, that it looks like it was an economic development commission. It was charged with producing an economic development plan. So, as I recall, looking at it, my memory fades, but, so that in itself is another factor about Main Street, you know, who knows? Like, it's kind of coming from all era places.
Yeah, so we'll get that cleaned up as well. So we'll move a little faster through the rest of this.
I'm happy to make a comment on that might play over the whole thing, because I wasn't taking it step by step. I was sort of taking it gestalt, sort of I learned that word. I think
You're doing a good job.
overall,
We're gonna
I
ask you
think-
to define it in a minute.
Yeah, I just I don't know if I'm using it correctly. It's, you know, to the point about, you know, it's referenced that we got to see the background on the CERC report in 2019. It seems, and let me just make it short and sweet. It's ambitious, I think, but I think it's unrealistic. I mean, I think we have a lot in here that's wonderful, but see this 2019 CERC about advanced CT, and it's just this sort of guiding sort of, it's nice about having this as a nice thing to give your board of selectmen or something like that, and you can refer to it, and I think it's all fantastic. But I think as a real functional strategic plan, I think it's ambitious. It sets high expectations that I think ignore some of the practical realities we have in the town. And so I think I would have suggestions for it, but that would be my comment there, that may go over to the whole thing. But that's how I approach it from an overall
Right.
comment on that.
So within that time frame that we were discussing, right? Like, there's a lot by the end of 2025. Okay. All right. So the second goal, which, you know, maintaining and investing in infrastructure and facilities. So when I read through this, really was strategy 5, right? Determining the former CCW future use. So something I mentioned to Mika when I spoke with him the other day, when I saw this, like, should this really live under goal 1 or goal 3, right? In terms of quality of life or, you know, financial stability. Yeah, I thought it was a little odd that it lived here, almost like, believe it or not, we couldn't figure out where it should live, right?
Right.
Like,
And especially if goal number 1 becomes housing. More
Right.
centered, more centric, or more
Yeah.
emphasis, if you did do that,
right.
then I could definitely see it.
But I think it
Rather than
speaks
an
to,
infrastructure.
it speaks to the possibilities for
Right.
the CCW, right? From a financial standpoint and also from a quality of life standpoint.
Right.
And
But right now it is land that we own. Maybe right now it belongs here.
right, right.
I agree with you, Scott. I don't think it belongs in goal 2 at all.
Right. It's like a thing we have to manage and
Yeah.
keep.
It's
upkeep.
not infrastructure. It's
Right.
just
Right. But we know that that's shifting, so
Okay.
it could be some feedback, like make a choice. I don't know.
We're
Or
sticking it.
right, right.
Yep.
The other thing is, you know, we know the target that's on the back of that particular piece of property. It's a target with a lot of focus and energy in this town and a lot of passion. And one of the things Scott mentioned early was that we have it looks like there's a prepackaged friendly 830G application right next to it. Essentially, it connects, it butts a little bit behind Greeley's Pond. And, you know, that's the first time we've seen, at least in my time, but after the zoning changes, you know, because the zoning changes weren't sweeping across the whole town. The zoning changes that they made, and I won't make a comment good or bad, you know, we can all do that as residents, but the zoning right now has a target on that non-public water supply watershed where there's sewer, remember where there's sewer and water. So zoning put a target on that for the multifamily, and we're seeing it now after that. We're seeing a target get hit, or at least get it thought about there. So I think that puts an even bigger focus, before the zoning change, the country club was a charged animal, charged up battery or whatever you want to call it. And now with the zoning change, we're seeing an 830G, that we need to tweak some things in order to make it work for us, to make it economic to develop this housing for you. That's the 830G. If that, glad to talk about that some more. But so I just think that there's even a bigger focus on what that property means other than just infrastructure, with its increased target after the changes in the zoning, which are isolated, not sweeping. Sweeping in the sense of broad around the town as opposed to in a particular area. So.
But even with that, I personally think it's actually could stay here for now.
For now.
For now, because it's going to go somewhere else. But for now, that's where it should stay. Or either that or make its own goal.
Okay. Anybody else have perspective on that? As is, or
As is.
move it? Okay. How about the individual tactics? Did anyone pick up on anything that
No, I think I
we
was
might
good with that.
recommend a tweak?
No, I was good. I'm good with that.
I saw tactic A as the current scope that Cooper Robertson's working against,
Yep.
and then even into tactic B. I felt like their work would end somewhere between B and C, and how they and then we go out for an RFP
Yeah.
from there. So
And then
We're-
do it, yeah. It's
we're
like-
good with
I'm good with it.
as stated. Okay. And then on enhancing quality of life, I picked up on, our name came up in tactic B, right, which really kind of spoke to how the Board of Selectmen interacts with the other boards and commissions. I don't know if I really had any recommendations there.
I think we are a relevant commission to that. Like we should be involved.
Right. And then go ahead, Scott.
I might, it's gonna sound like a broken record and a theme with me, but, in that tactic B where, I think we are mentioned, there's another mention for affordable housing. And I think that's important, that as we sort of understand that housing is housing, workforce housing is affordable housing as well. So if you ask the framers of this, what do you mean by workforce housing? What is your intention when affordable housing and workforce housing, opportunity housing? These are all names for housing, and they're all the same. They're just different sort of spins that, actually, I don't know if spin's the right word, but they're just, so for instance, what is workforce housing and what is affordable housing? They're the same. So, but people like to use them in different settings because they seem more palatable at times. So, why are we putting it here when we're talking about it over here? So I think maybe when we start to talk about the emphasis of housing, we just talk about the emphasis of housing and where that should live, and housing is a goal. That would be a theme that I've been pretty clear about, but I don't mean to be so hard on that. But it gives the impression that there's something stigmatic about affordable housing versus workforce housing when they're the same thing. So what are we saying? What are we trying to say by saying that?
Okay. So the other area that I picked up on was under strategy 12, expanding housing opportunities in the business district and throughout the town to support local businesses. Right? So
we're not mentioned here.
We're not, but the business district
Is,
is,
it's our thing.
is of concern, right? We're not, concern's wrong word. But I thought, housing opportunities in the business district to support local businesses, I think speaks to not necessarily workforce housing, but more traffic, more
More traffic, yeah.
people in the area to support those businesses in the business district.
Yep.
Right? Which is another, I think, an interesting way to look at the benefits
Yeah.
of housing. And evaluating zoning modifications. So, that's really kind of the next step down there. But any modifications to anything in this area?
Where exactly are we right now?
Under, if you look at strategy 12, tactic A.
Second to last page.
You got it.
I was gonna, I think if we get a chance at the end of the agenda, my last comment on the plan would be, and I was really gonna sort of introduce the subject if we have a discussion about the 2030 task force and how we're sort of, you guys are intersecting with that and sort of watching that and getting your thoughts on how we think about that. But the thing that struck me about this plan, and let me just back up to the 2030, is that when I listened to SLR talk about the POCD, when they were presenting to get the gig to do the POCD, they said that if you really wanted to be transformative in your business district, for, and capitalize on all the good work you've done on the 2030 and the placemaking, to be transformative, you may need to think about the creation of an MDA, a Municipal Development Authority. Now, so to make this a comment about our plan right now, and we can have that, but I think this sort of speaks to the existing institutions that we have that were probably built for a different political reality years ago, and we're fitting in all the different institutions that we have right now in the town, and we have a new, the world is moving forward. And I think the MDA is an example of that if we wanted to be transformative, we'll have to think about, when we talk about that, should that be in the POCD? If you want to do something with 2030, and the lots of grant, and if you're going to be changing zoning down there, who should be, providing the advice to that and so forth. So I think it's a comment here is that there maybe should be an appreciation for not centralizing control so much as we might have done in the old days. It's a bigger world. It's a more complex world and so that maybe we need to think about new institutions that move things forward, report back, of course, for control and oversight and all those things, but create the new institutions that have a little bit more experts in those areas. That's the back. I mean, I came from Yale, and it's like, I don't know how you've heard that organization under one roof, because every department had their own experts and they were all, doing great things. And to centralize that would have destroyed that synergy. And I think that's sort of missing here, that this seems more getting input and a centralized body doing it. So along the way, I don't have my thoughts really formulated too much on that, except when it comes to the 2030.
Right. Okay. Anything else on this goal? My final thought on this goal, and it kind of sinks into the POCD, was, sometimes when you think about enhancing the quality of life, right, and where the EDC comes into play, a lot of what I read in the feedback on the community survey was the town's kind of looking at the commercial, the business district. They're looking at it for EDC to not only relieve the tax burdens, but also bring more
Build it up.
amenities
Yeah,
and
that came
right.
from-
And so I mean,
absolutely
it
came
really was screaming both of these, right? Like, hey, we want to ease the tax burden, and while you're at it, I don't want to have to drive, an hour to go get a bag of groceries, right?
Yep.
So I don't know that there isn't more in this strategy that could speak to that. on the enhancing the quality of life, right? But,
And this comment may seem a little bit out of left field, but to me, it seems to resonate, and that is, you know, while we're involving these other commissions, why aren't we involving the Board of Finance? I mean, they are going to be directly impacted by anything that we do, and they are our financial experts in town. I'm just sort of noticing that they're not part of the conversation.
okay.
I could take a stab.
Yeah.
Why maybe historically, and it's only from my past experience, the difference between finance and investment. You know, I worked for a school that had an investments office, and we actually were the only school, one of the very few schools in the whole country, that actually did its financing, its bond financing and so forth, out of the investments office. We saw bond financing as an investment. That's an example of, I think finance is more about controls, is about, you know, running your financial statements, all, you know, it's finance. Whereas I think a lot of what we're doing here is investments, you know, we're doing economic development, and it's not real finance work. I think some of finance could actually come over to us, because I think we could think of some of the things that have been deemed into finance. So it's a kind of a reverse way of answering your question, is that I think we're focused more on the investment side of the house for the town, and we could actually grab some of the finance side of the house and treat it as an investment, not to make it riskier, but to make it more grow. And finance is finance.
I guess what I'm thinking is, we had a conversation about tax abatements.
Right, that's what I was just thinking.
Aren't they, shouldn't they be involved? You know, we're adding 70 condominium units now.
Mm-hmm.
Can the fire department handle that with the equipment that they have? Or is there, you know, the need for additional equipment? You know, the ongoing conversation about educational requirements, all depending upon what the development is.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, and now granted, I know that the Board of Selectmen is involved in this, that they are, you know, the elected body. But, you know, again, I'm just sort of wondering that we don't have any sort of representation from the Board of Finance. It's included in the dialogue.
I think Steve's right, and I think why you're right is something we talked about a while ago, which is what are our targets? What are we gonna try to achieve with all of these different efforts we have here?
Sure.
Are we gonna grow the grand list by X percent? Are we trying to attract 15 more businesses? What the Board of Finance can do for us is tell us, here's what Woodbridge looks like today, and here's what it could look like 10 years, 15 years down the road. You guys gotta figure out how to absorb that additional, I'll pick a number, $5 million more of expense Woodbridge is gonna have, on top of bringing in more stuff to lower the mill rate. Right now, you gotta figure out how to keep the mill rate where it is,
Right.
but we're trying to figure out how to lower the mill rate. Those add together, you know? So that's where I think the Board of Finance can come in. They could tell us what we have to do long-term.
Right, to provide more of a metric,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that was also a comment that I had when I looked at the goals, right? And you typically want the measurement and the time, right, associated with the goals, and they were kind of missing that. But, yeah, I don't. But it's a good point, Steve, and I think maybe we could talk a little further about where and how they come in. But what came to my mind was like the tax abatement conversation. I can tell you 2 years ago when we came up with the tax abatement, it was developed in this room, and then it was shipped to the Board of Selectmen. Okay, and they said, "Great, let's put it on hold." And, you know, if an opportunity shows up, then we can revisit it. Okay, but should we have brought the finance folks in, right? And okay, if we offer an abatement like this, right, what impact does that have on budget?
Sure. I mean, what shape might it take?
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a good point.
But I think also the cost benefit analysis is, you know, what you're saying is, and I think it's absolutely 100% part of the investment thesis. So I think I agree with you 100%. I just disagree with where it would be in the talent base that would be there to analyze that, because they're the finance people, but
the cost benefit analysis, right, in that thesis for the investment, because the investment may fail because the thesis is bad, because it's gonna produce too much cost. So I think that cost benefit is in the investment thesis when you would go to the pitch the investment, and you say, it just doesn't pencil out, it's not a good one for our town. But I think that's better made by the investment people, the EDC people that actually look at those costs, rather than, so that's all we differ on, is where, and not what. Because I couldn't agree with you more, the investment thesis is critical, the cost benefit analysis in the investment thesis.
Okay.
But not a finance function.
Okay.
Could we go back to when your comment about enhance the quality of life?
Yeah.
And how, because you said, maybe we can attract businesses so we don't have to drive out of town to do things. Should we recommend adding that as a strategy? Under goal 3,
Based on the survey results, right?
based on the survey results?
Yeah, I
And-
mean, let's maybe get into that, but that could be an interesting, we could offer that up, right? And sort of getting into what types of businesses
What,
we
yeah,
want to
what kind of
attract.
business could be here? We're 8,000 people here, so it's, we have to keep that in mind. But still, could we attract some people, some businesses here, so we don't have to necessarily drive to Orange or drive down
Right.
New Haven or drive here or drive there, just keep it in
Yeah.
town.
Yeah, I like. Let's look at the POCD
Okay.
results. But I like that, sometimes I think if we just look at purely what is the tax benefit.
Right.
Right, we could say, oh, this isn't worth anything, but it's actually worth something in quality of life,
Right.
which is not.
Yeah, when you brought it up, I started flipping through and said, didn't see it in there, so I thought
Right.
it might be a good thing to add.
Right. So, general thoughts on, I know I just shipped this last night, right? So,
Yep.
again, I was watching the Mets game and like reading this at the same
Yeah, I know,
time.
you have your priorities.
Right. Well, I did. I was trying to
Right.
do it all.
And then Diaz started walking people and you were more distracted.
Right. So, and there, and the takeaways, right? The quality of life, right? There it is. And-
as they're presenting this, did they usually when you present an executive summary like this, you'll list okay, this one was definitely the most obvious, and then it's kind of ranked order that way. So quality of life, they start talking about right off the get-go.
Right. So, yeah, and I think it's a question of we bring in more services. Is that going to relieve the tax burden, or is it a quality of life? Right. So that was kind of where my
But my takeaway from the survey is that, one, it was refreshing because it aligned with what I want to see for the town. But also, 7% of the population voted in this thing, which I don't know if that's good or bad.
That's good.
Is it good?
They actually put a footnote here, Chatty, that SLR generally aims for a 2% response rate.
Perfect.
Yeah,
So-
it's
So
good.
that,
We get straight A.
Yeah.
good, because
Right.
so everything we're talking about here in this, all the feedback we got is what we talk about in here, what we want to do for the town. So I think that helps us because I think it supports us going forward in terms of getting things passed, getting ideas, getting the population on board with various ideas to change the town a little bit. So that was my takeaway. It's I think it's good groundwork for what we have in front of us in terms of bringing the population on board with some of the things we discuss.
Right. Yeah, I had noted in there that, amongst the top quality of life concerns was the lack of nearby retail stores, right? Which was great. I tagged that 2030, and then I saw in here, mixed use housing is desired. That's also where
Right.
2030 is headed, right? And so, there were a lot of, I agree, there were a lot of things that was like, okay, well, we know this is where we want to go, and it's what the town is looking for. What I thought was interesting, when we went to the workshop on, what night was that, Tuesday? Right, Tuesday,
Tuesday.
2 nights ago.
Tuesday.
There was an exercise, and I actually took a picture of it, where they had different photographs of the types of businesses that you would want to see, and then there were green stickers and red stickers, and there were red stickers all over chain stores, right? And there were green stores over, you know, restaurants, more, I think, mom and pop type things. Steve, Scott, you can add to it, but there was a desire for, I think, more unique type
Right.
businesses versus the chains,
Okay.
which I felt really good about that
Yeah.
because
But that would have been a 1% group, not a 7.
So explain to me how exactly people walked around and put stickers on things.
well, yeah, I mean there were different stations.
Green meant good and red means not so
Right,
good.
so there
Okay.
was
Interesting.
like, what type of businesses would you wanna see, but instead of just filling out a survey,
I like that.
react to images that you see. The sample size was perfect. So, so I thought that was really telling, where folks wanted, it was clearly like no chains, okay? But they wanna have more of a community feel. I did take a picture of it, so I'll route
Okay.
it.
Alright.
to folks, 'cause I
Did we,
wanted-
we didn't take the number of attendants that came in.
I have no
from the-
idea how many attended, but
Might
it
have been
was
50 maybe.
over the 3 or 4 hours that it was.
Yeah.
was
I
open.
stayed the 3. I think a lot stayed the 7.
Yeah, so I mean, it was there. I felt there was a lot of there were a lot of good things that were represented there. But what other comments did folks have on the survey results?
Well, like Judy said, it's in line with what I'm looking for as well. The diverse opinions on certain topics came through loud and clear that we've seen before in previous things.
Okay. I picked up under, if you go a little further in on, like, I think it's page 7, under the economic development piece, there are too few retail stores, restaurants, entertainment, cultural facilities.
Yep.
So that was, I thought was encouraging. It's, my takeaway was that the town wants more retail and shopping and restaurants.
They do.
I don't know that there's a desire for heavy manufacturing, right? That did not come through here. As we start to think about what sectors we would wanna focus on.
Right.
Well, they also said too that the pedestrian experience in the business district, if that
Mhm.
was unsafe, right? It's not like a,
Yeah.
which I think is a key issue.
Well, I actually pointed out that they feel safe from crime. If you go a little further, it says over 60% of the participants feel the business district is lacking a good mix of shops, right? But then it goes on to say participants do agree, however, that the buildings feel like the right size, that they feel safe from crime, almost 60%.
That's surprising to me.
So-
Safe from crime, maybe, not safe
That's
from walking.
Not
Right.
safe from walking, okay. But we know that there's
I'm sorry.
considerable crime
Yeah,
issue.
down there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, there's
Yeah.
the perception of the crime issue down there is
Yes.
high.
There's a big perception of,
That's surprising.
yeah, big perception that once you cross into New Haven, you're going to get shot or something.
Yeah.
That is not correct. I lived in New Haven
Because
for a long
anything,
time.
Oh, I know.
anytime something happens at Stop and Shop, it's all over the mother's page.
Yeah.
My pocketbook got stolen, this one got taken, it's like,
Right.
Scott, I want to go back to a comment you made earlier about there's no evidence of heavy manufacturing in this. I don't want to lose that. There may not be evidence of heavy manufacturing that just because they may not be thinking of that during this survey. They're thinking more about quality of life, going out, having dinner, buying
yeah.
some fancy shoes. Because you also don't get anything like, well, we want to bring in large medical sector into the town,
Right.
making whatever medical supplies or doing medical research. They don't bring that up either. So I don't want to not consider that.
No,
Just
no,
wanted to
I'm
see
not saying we wouldn't.
Yeah.
We wouldn't consider it.
Yeah.
I'm saying this is sort of the voice of the people, right?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is-
Right.
And yeah, is that not top of mind, right? But what if you turned around and said, hey, there's a new, Yale facility that wants to come
Yeah,
in,
you make a good
and-
point.
and it's going to contribute $5 million a year.
But we don't have a
tax
survey
revenue.
that supports that, so we can't do it.
We don't, right? But
I'm just
but
saying,
like,
you wouldn't wanna have that happen, right? You
Yeah.
wouldn't wanna have something really good for the town, say, well, we just don't have a survey that supports that, so sorry.
Good starting point.
No, and
Right.
that is one of the things I've learned, right? Is a lot of times people need to see something put
Yeah,
in front of them to react to it, and
yeah.
having them react to the,
A beacon.
right,
That's right.
right.
But there's a lot of concern also about traffic.
Yeah.
And especially speeding.
Right,
Yep.
You know, and as we think about the 2030 plan,
Ugh.
you know, people are gonna be walking down there and talk about safety,
mhm.
right?
Absolutely.
Right, I think it's intended to do that. I know there's also concerns about what the traffic will look like
Yeah.
down there, right? It's, it can be tough, so. Anything else, out of the survey that,
People want a town pool,
people want a town pool?
thought that was interesting,
Yeah.
not for us, but it's interesting.
Well, and I think it's that, you know, enhance the quality of life,
Right.
Yeah.
aspect.
Yeah, and
I have a fondness for the pool. Going back to the days of Beecher, I was a little Beecher Road kid in the pool, so
Well, I think even the
I know
pool
the
that we
day.
had at the country club
Yeah.
for a little while,
For a little while,
Yeah.
yeah.
right?
yeah.
I know, it was, my daughter was like 5, 6 years old at that point, and it was like an extension in the summer
Yep.
of school. They were able to stay connected with their
Yep.
friends, right? So, anyway, in the interest of time. The one thing I did want to point out, it was under the housing section that I thought was interesting, was there was clearly,
Hey, John?
on 3, on page 6,
6, okay.
there's a clear response in here about the need for more affordable housing. You know, which I thought was great to see the community, you know, bringing that
Recognizing.
forward.
Yeah.
The type of affordable housing is still single-family structures, which I think is,
Hard to build.
it's challenging,
Yeah,
right? So when they think about affordable housing,
Yeah,
it's,
And from the cost benefit.
and, you know, only 15.5% chose multifamily structures.
Right.
Which are probably the easiest
Right.
way to get to affordable housing.
mhm.
And not to prolong that conversation, but I thought that was interesting, that there was that, that's what played back there, so.
Okay.
All right, so on the POCD, where do we go? We have to provide some input, feedback, like I said, 10 years. Has anyone looked at at the 2015? It's 180 something pages. So as I was explaining, I think to Steve, there's like 10 pages in the middle of it that focus on economic development. It's worth looking at those 10 pages.
Okay.
You'll find it. It's very well broken out, but it's a good example of where were they a decade ago.
Mhm.
And you can see the beginnings of what became 2030, right? So this was in 2015. And what I thought was funny is it took 5 years to form an ad hoc committee. Right? And then another 5 years to get to where we are today, right? So sometimes progress takes a bit, but so I think where we want to go with this is we want to get some feedback to them on what we see or what we would want reflected in the POCD as part of the plan. We provide that to the consultant, or provide it to Chris, and then in January, SLR, who's the consultant on the POCD, is going to come back with something for us to react to, right? So, so I'm going to take on the Board of Selectmen feedback, but I didn't know if anyone wanted to take on this portion of just kind of calling something together. And I was going to ask Chris for an example of what others have provided, so we have like kind of a starting point on what that feedback looks like. So does anyone volunteer?
What's the timing on it? We have to get it to them.
What I would envision would be we'd have something to react to next meeting, and then
Okay.
we would hand that off.
I'm sorry, can you go back through the request that you're asking for? What do we want to give the POCD? what input do we want to give towards the POCD?
They want input and what our, as it was stated in the email, what our goals would be for the next 10 years
Okay, for the town.
for the town from an economic development perspective, right? So, if no one wants it, I'm happy to pick it up, go back to Chris, get some clarification. We can just leave it there.
Can you remember, did EDC really have anything in the POCD in 2015? Off the top of your head, do you?
Off the top of my head,
Yeah.
I wasn't on the.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, but in reviewing the 2015 POCD.
I was a lot younger, 10 years ago. What?
That's what I'm saying.
We all were 10
We all
years
were
younger,
younger.
right?
But I meant, in the 2015 POCD, I haven't taken a look at it as to where it figured, where ECD figured in that, and, you know, and if it didn't figure, and, you know, I sort of, maybe this is wrong, but I sort of get the sense that it's such a general sort of framework that you watch.
Look at it, Scott.
Yeah. it's not
There
general?
is a very detailed
It's right
plan
there.
for the
It's
business,
right there.
the Woodbridge, the village,
Okay.
and it came out of work
Oh,
that they did in 2013.
The
and
village district you're saying with
Yeah.
design guidelines, the whole,
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Did they have a consultant to do that 2015 POCD?
Yes, they did. So, we're not drafting that. I think they want sort of
Yes.
our, it was put as goals, but I think it could even be more general input, but let me go to Chris and
But was
try
it
to-
EDC in that, or was it zoning in that district? In other words,
No, it was
No, that's the way I-
economic development.
okay, not just sort of a village district zone like that, because that's certainly in the zoning code. And,
Well, it was labeled as the village district,
right, that's a zoning thing.
but it was the plan for the village district because they were trying to move away from the flats. Okay, this is where they were in 2015.
Yeah, yeah.
Because they were going to rename it the
Village.
Village of Woodbridge, and that was the whole concept
idea.
around. Yeah.
John, Scott, I have a couple of pages with the action items of economic development, just like. five
Okay.
of them.
In the
Want me to
POCD?
Copy, yeah. Let me make a few copies.
With the action items that the consultant had pulled together.
I'm not sure who put them together,
Okay.
but it's the economic
you
development
what.
action plan.
Since it's 7:15, let me go to Chris.
Okay.
All right, and I'll get clarity on that before we march forward. Okay?
Thank you.
I don't feel comfortable having you just have to shoulder that with everything else that's going on, so, yeah.
It's an email.
I feel like I need more direction on what we're doing throughout.
That's what I want to get from Chris.
I'd be very happy to help you with some of the writing.
Okay.
I'm with Steve, yeah. A little
Well,
more
let's
direction.
get the clarification from her, all right,
Okay,
and then
all right.
we'll
Yeah.
pick it up. Because I know 2030 is gonna, you all are gonna get more involved in that. There's a meeting next week, okay, for that. So I want to be sensitive to.
Okay.
There's a lot that we cover in this meeting that go around.
There's a lot going
It's
on.
expanding.
Yeah. So, all right, on 2030, so Steve and Chatty, I just told you, I had a quick call with Susan this week, just kind of talking about 2030 and EDC and how do we eventually bring them together. So one thing Susan did bring up is their focus right now. Obviously, we have the connectivity piece of this, but she's really focused on how do we begin the steps to modify the zoning to get mixed use, right? And she's actually folding in the town planner into that conversation as well. So that is really where she's at right now. We also talked about the traffic light, right? And what was, I actually should have started here. At the beginning of the meeting last night, they awarded the engineering design for the connectivity, which is like another, like a 12-month project. So SLR was awarded that full engineering portion of the
What was the
project.
number? Was that like 900?
It is, and then I was trying to follow the
900,000.
bouncing ball of how much of that comes out of lots of,
700, right? 700,000. Cost of the light?
No, the 900,
That's
no,
the cost of the
the
light.
the planning contract with
Oh.
SLR
Right.
or something was.
right, for the
Is that
full
10% of
engineering-
the, 10% of the grant.
Right, for the full engineering plan. So I know that was gonna get funded by the ARPA
Right.
funds. But I think a portion of that now, can come out of the LOTSIP grant. So it's not entirely from our ARPA, but it frees up some of the ARPA
Right,
funds, right?
right.
And that's why, when I saw
That's
that,
what I
I
like
was
to
kind of
hear.
like, hey, maybe we have some for, you know. So one of the things that Paul DiStefano of SLR brought up was the traffic light, and that they had pushed to have the Department of Transportation, I think he said, put the footings in, even though they did not approve the traffic light. He tried to push them to like give us the ability to add a traffic light, you know, in the future, and they're still debating that. But one of the things we are looking for is, and Chris Sullivan's going to provide it, was how did the JCC get their light on Amity, right? And is there an approach there that could help us get an approval? And a lot of it's going to come from traffic studies. There was a traffic study that was done for Toll Brothers when that was built. And Paul mentioned last night that that would be very helpful for them to go back to the DOT. But one thing he did say was, we really get one more crack at the DOT. Like, it can't be a game of we just keep bombarding them. So I encourage you to watch the beginning of the meeting so you can hear him talk about it. But to go back, you know, we've got to go back with like our best foot forward and all the research. But he felt that that would be very helpful.
Okay.
So
I had a quick question on the 20, Tony sent around all the agendas and the minutes, or it's mostly the minutes from the 2030, right? The past minutes?
That was for their agenda to vote on the.
Oh, okay, so I thought you were saying, you were sort of showing us what happened to get up
No.
to speed on the
I think-
2030, so that's coming, all those minutes haven't been approved yet.
Right, they need
Oh,
to,
okay.
because I think sometimes they had quorum issues, or I'm not
Okay.
really quite sure.
Well, I took a look at them, and one thing that popped, so I thought it was a study project. So I looked at the minutes for all the 2030 meetings. And one thing that popped out to me is that at least there wasn't open discussions about, in the minutes, there wasn't open discussions about the particular types of zoning changes. And I think because you mentioned traffic and all sorts of different issues that zoning changes can bring up, I think that's a huge issue. It's gonna be fun, but you know, it's just a big issue, a big lift. And is Susan gonna be taking that through from 2030? And is 2030 playing into the POCD with all those zoning potential? Because I don't know exactly what they're thinking on the zoning changes, because there's nothing really specific about what they were thinking that's gonna flow from a $9 million, or whatever that number is, but, you know, a large number of infrastructure would probably, one would think, contemplate a pretty transformative zoning change as well. And I just don't know what they're thinking.
Yeah.
I mean, and are they gonna take it through into the POCD and stuff like that?
well, her point
Or are we gonna
was,
miss it, you know?
and this is where I get to our town planner, right, has a lot of people showing up at their doorstep, and this is one where Susan was like hopeful that they could help us with that, right? Because this is Justin, who I spoke with today, this is really his area, is in zoning and zoning changes, and he has a lot of expertise there. So Susan was hopeful that they could help them move that forward.
Great, yeah, I mean, I'm just,
Yeah.
cause that's another huge, you know, that's just another real biggie. And
Yeah.
that one doesn't have the same sort of changes that were made in 2021. You know, those, you know, that were narrow in a particular area, that doesn't have, that area hasn't had real significant changes for a lot of years, you know, so that's gonna be more of a,
Yeah,
not incremental, that's gonna be boom.
right.
Or could be boom, I don't know what they're thinking, there's nothing on the record.
Okay. Next item was business retention, so this is quick. I did chat with Dale. He wants to work with us to put together a formal business retention strategy. Again, another thing that will fall under the overarching economic development strategy. But so we had a good conversation about it. He recommended, hey, you should put together a subcommittee, right? And Rick and Cliff had expressed interest already. I wanted to open that up. I don't think we need to have a ton of people on this one, right? But what he was sort of envisioning was a more formalized process, which we've been talking about, and how do we engage with the existing businesses, right? And I think there's a ton to learn from, you know, what they have to say, and, you know, even those that leave, why did you leave, right? In a way that we can get better. So, if anyone else is interested in that, he has a note, he's gonna call me when I saw him yesterday. But, you know, Rick, you had expressed an interest.
Yeah, I still.
Okay.
I'm happy to join that, cause I feel
Okay.
as if it's like a sales strategy.
It's like a
Which
sales
is my
strategy.
wheelhouse.
Yeah.
And that's like where I live.
It's the
and breathe.
retention, it's
Yeah,
the
I love-
retention
yeah,
side though,
yeah.
it's keep the customer.
Yeah, exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
All right,
Gotta re-recruit everybody every.
all right, so speaking, of that, so we did, last item was just the retail pop-ups. You wanna
Sure, so.
talk to where we are on those?
So there's a few moving pieces in this. There's the Up Next folks, which are the folks that kind of come in and build the plan for us. I did speak to Jeremy Rosner,
Okay.
to understand what type of retail space is out there right now that we could use for this.
Yeah,
We've identified two, the old La Brasas.
okay,
Is that how you say it, Brasas, La Brasas?
yeah,
There's that, and then there's the UPS store. Because again, all the other ones that are open right now are just way too large. So it can't be more than 1,600 square feet, and those two fit in that area.
mm-hmm,
The other idea that we thought about too, the place where Saloon is, what's the name of that? I don't know what the name of that area is, where all the little shops are.
Mm.
That area too, one thing we talked about too for the mobile option is Jeremy had said he works with the landlord there, and potentially we could actually park the mobile in the parking lot there.
okay.
And that's something he'd be willing to have a conversation with the property owner for that too. So
Mhm.
those are like our three targets right now from
Yeah.
a location perspective,
Okay.
right? The next piece is budget, right? So I need to understand, figure out who do I go to and how do we actually figure out what the money is.
Mhm.
It's gonna range from $30,000, which is the mobile unit,
Yeah,
up to about $100,000, with a full pop-up, implementation.
right,
It's gonna, right now, we would target spring of 2025 is where we would look for. Potentially maybe summer too, but she's thinking spring is better. And so once we know we have the funds and how much funds we have, I would go back to her, and then she would actually give us a proposal.
okay,
And then talk about what we could do.
okay,
I am leaning more towards, the more I speak to her, I'm leaning more towards the mobile option.
okay,
Because I think we put our foot in the water, we test it out, we see how it is. The cool thing about the mobile option is that it's also less commitment from the people. So you would do an 8-week mobile option, and you would swap different vendors out each week, right, to give people a little bit of a taste of what's there,
yeah,
and just to get our feet wet in it versus doing a huge pop-up. With the pop-up, it's more of a hybrid approach. So they're based out of Boston.
right,
So in Boston, they would come in, they do the fixtures, they do the painting, they do all of that. With this, what she wants to propose to us is a hybrid approach, where we would still use all their resources, all their consulting, but we would take on the project of doing a project manager here and doing the fixtures and getting the place built.
okay.
So that's where we sit right now. Let me see if there's anything else.
Do they get involved with the promotion side of
They
it?
do everything. So
Okay.
so whether we do the
That's-
mobile
Yeah,
or whether we do the big pop-up, what would happen is we would become part of their website and part of their marketing. And they would vet all the folks for us. We would have to work with, my next step too is to work with the Chamber of Commerce to understand, are there local people that that we think would be interested in doing these types of things? So I think there's a little bit of work to do there for like local people, but once we identified some local, I would say artisans, if that's what you wanna call them.
yeah,
Once you identify those, we would then bring them to the Up Next pop-up company, and then they vet them for us.
okay,
And then we would work with them from a consultatory perspective each week, and where we would go. So it is, I think, the hybrid approach, being that they're not local, I think would be harder from a first step.
right,
The mobile unit, they're based in Maine, so she's getting information from me about if they would come down here. They go to Boston all the time, so she thinks she could sell them on coming to Connecticut,
okay,
and didn't think that would be an issue.
Right.
So, from a next steps perspective, I think I need to figure out money. So if I go to her and say, okay, I have X amount of funds,
Yeah.
who do I have that conversation with to identify that? Because once I have that, I can go to her and say, okay, build us a proposal. And then I can take a proposal here, we could actually talk about it and talk it through.
Right.
On a parallel path, I have to have a conversation with the Chamber of Commerce.
Mhm.
And also, I'm gonna set up a meeting with her, I wanna say, it's her business development person, of where the best resources are that they've used to find local artisans that kind of build
Yeah,
these
that's
types
what I
of
was gonna
things.
say, right?
That's my next to do of
Okay.
how we actually target that and how we figure that out.
Mhm.
But once we figure that out, the vetting process and all that goes right to them.
Okay. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, there are multiple chambers of commerce
Mhm.
here that we can connect with, right? I mean, we just met with New Haven the other day,
Mhm.
Greater New Haven, right? And then there's one in the Valley, and there's one even in Orange
Okay.
that I've been talking to. So we can put that together. Why don't we coordinate time with Tony
Great, okay.
Genovese? And I'm kind of thinking if there are ARPA funds, that's kind of the logical one, but we know that there's a time frame, like end of the year, they go, right?
But I
So,
think if we're under so
have to be under contract.
you have to be under contract, because
Right.
she was saying too, a lot of people are using their 24 ARPA funds.
Right.
That they all have to be under contract, but they're using them in 25.
Right, so the question is, can you contract something that doesn't exist, right? Like, if we don't have a business to populate it,
Right.
how does that,
Yep.
how does that work? So that's where I think
Okay.
I'll connect you with Tony,
Right.
and then,
And then also too, the Chamber of Commerce stuff, I
Yeah,
think would be
yeah.
great too, because that's like
Yeah.
my next. Because she said once we understand what funds we would have to target, then she can build us a proposal and start moving if we want to.
okay, cool. All right, any public comment? No?
They're very loud tonight.
We have a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, Chad is quick with the second, and all in favor?
Aye.
Say aye.
Thank you, everybody.
All right.